He was a Navy SEAL who survived war, but nothing prepared him for inheriting a house with no mirrors. Every wall was bare, every reflection missing, and his German shepherd sensed something was wrong before he did. At night, the old building seemed to breathe, as if guarding a painful truth hidden in silence. The mirrors were removed for a reason, to protect someone who was never ready to be forced to look. What he discovered was not fear or madness, but a fragile journey of healing and faith. This story is about learning when to stand strong and when to wait with compassion. If this story moves you, please like, subscribe, and help Silent Paws Steady Hearts reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Rowan Hale woke at 3:17 a.m. without the mercy of a nightmare. No gunfire echoed behind his eyes. No faces from old missions rose screaming from the dark. It was worse than that. It was the quiet certainty, cold, precise, unarguable, that someone else was in the apartment with him. The room was still, too still. The old northern night pressed against the windows, pale with moonlight, the kind that made snow glow even when there was none on the ground. Rowan lay motionless on the narrow bed, breathing slow, counting heartbeats the way he had learned to do long before civilian life. 1, 2, 3. The air smelled faintly of clean wood and cold metal. No footsteps, no voices. Nothing out of place.
And yet the feeling remained, heavy and exact, like a finger resting on the trigger of his awareness. Beside the bed, Ash stirred. The German shepherd did not bark. He did not growl. He did not rush the door in a burst of instinct or fear. Instead, the dog rose into a seated position with a quiet discipline that mirrored Rowan's own, his large frame steady, back straight, ears lifting not in alarm, but in focus. Ash's gaze fixed on the open doorway that led down the short hall toward the bathroom. His amber-brown eyes did not blink. Rowan sat up slowly. 40 years had taught his body when not to rush. He swung his feet onto the floor, the wood cool beneath his soles, and listened. The apartment offered nothing in return. No creak of old pipes, no whisper of displaced air.
Only the distant, familiar sound of the building's ancient elevator groaning somewhere below. A long mechanical exhale that rose through the bones of the structure like a tired animal shifting in its sleep. "Easy," Rowan murmured, more habit than reassurance. Ash did not look at him. That was the first wrong thing. Rowan stood and crossed the bedroom in 3 measured steps. The hallway was narrow, painted in off-white that caught the moonlight and returned it softly, without glare. He reached for the bathroom switch and flipped it on. Light flooded the small room. White tile, clean sink, a shower curtain hanging perfectly still. The faint smell of disinfectant, sharp and honest. Everything exactly as it should be. Except for the wall above the sink, there was no mirror. Rowan knew this. He had known it when he moved in. When the real estate agent, a thin woman with brittle cheer and a habit of smiling at the wrong moments, had joked about the previous owner's quirks. He had known it when he unpacked, when he stood in the bathroom the first night and reached out by instinct, fingers brushing flat wall where glass should have been. But now, in the full glare of the overhead light, something else was there. A smear. Not blood, not dirt. A faint, cloudy mark on the paint, shaped like the heel of a hand. Fingers blurred, as if someone had pressed and then thought better of it. As if they had touched the wall and pulled away at the last second. Rowan's breath caught. Not sharply, not enough to make a sound, but just enough to remind him that his body still remembered how to respond before his mind did. That mark had not been there before. He was certain of it. Not the way people were certain of things they wanted to believe, but the way soldiers were certain of details that kept them alive. He had studied this room, counted the tiles, noted the faint crack near the baseboard. The wall had been blank. Behind him, Ash moved. The dog stepped forward and planted himself squarely in the doorway, blocking the bathroom with his body. His hackles did not rise. His teeth did not bare. but his stance was unmistakable, solid, immovable, deliberate. When Rowan tried to step past him, Ash did not budge. "Ash," Rowan said quietly. The dog did not obey. It was the first time he ever hadn't. Rowan looked down at him then, really looked. Ash was 6, maybe 7 years old, a large German shepherd with the balanced build of a working dog rather than the exaggerated angles of a show animal. His coat lay close to his body, black along the spine and shoulders, fading into warm tan along his legs and chest. A faint silvering dusted his muzzle, earned rather than aged. His eyes were calm but intent, the eyes of a creature trained not just to act, but to assess. Ash was not afraid. He was warning him. Rowan stepped back. The moment stretched. Then Ash shifted his weight slightly, just enough to release the pressure in the air, though he did not leave the doorway. Rowan exhaled slowly and reached for the jacket draped over the back of a chair near the bedroom door. He slid it on, the familiar weight settling around his shoulders like a remembered roll. His fingers brushed something sharp in the pocket. Rowan froze. He drew the object out slowly, holding it between thumb and forefinger under the light. A shard of glass, no larger than a coin, its edges dulled but unmistakable. One side caught the bathroom light and returned it faintly, a ghost of reflection trembling on its surface. Rowan stared at it. He did not own any glass like this. There had been no broken windows, no mirrors, no reason, no possible reason for it to be in his pocket. Ash's gaze dropped to the shard, then lifted back to Rowan's face.
Somewhere deep in the building, the elevator groaned again, longer this time, its cables complaining as it descended, floor by floor, through the sleeping structure. The sound crawled up Rowan's spine, not as fear, but as recognition. Old buildings made noise. Old buildings remembered things. He moved to the front door and checked the lock. Solid. Deadbolt engaged. No scratches, no sign of tampering. He knelt and checked the secondary latch, then the chain. All intact. The hallway camera outside his unit, installed by the building years ago and never upgraded, showed nothing but grainy stillness when he accessed it from his phone. No shadows, no movement, no intruder. Rowan leaned back against the door and closed his eyes briefly. He had spent a lifetime learning to read danger.
This did not feel like an attack. It felt like a test. The thought settled into him with uncomfortable ease. He glanced back toward the bathroom. The smear on the wall seemed paler now, less certain, as if the light itself could not quite decide whether it belonged there. Rowan tucked the glass shard back into his pocket without knowing why. Some instincts ran deeper than logic. When he straightened, Ash finally stepped aside, allowing Rowan a clear view of the bathroom once more. The dog did not follow him in. He remained in the hall, sitting, watching, guarding the threshold as if it marked a boundary that should not be crossed without consequence. Rowan stood in the doorway and did not enter. The realization came quietly, without drama, without the pounding urgency of combat. It arrived the way hard truths always did, fully formed and impossible to ignore. If this apartment was a battlefield, then the enemy was not hiding in shadows or corners. The enemy was denying him reflection. Rowan turned off the bathroom light and stood in the dark, listening to the building breathe around him, Ash's steady presence at his back anchoring him to something solid and real. Whatever this place was, it was not done with him yet. And for the first time since leaving the teams, Rowan understood something with absolute clarity. He was being asked to hold the line. Morning arrived without ceremony. A pale northern light seeped through the apartment windows, flattening shadows and softening the edges of the long hallway. Rowan Hale sat at the small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling between his hands, the events of the night before arranged neatly in his mind the way he arranged maps before a mission. He did not replay them with panic. He replayed them with discipline. The mark on the wall, the shard of glass, Ash blocking the bathroom doorway. None of it fit together yet, But Rowan knew better than to discard pieces simply because the picture refused to form. Ash lay on the floor near the front door, his body stretched out but not relaxed.
Even at rest, the German Shepherd remained alert, ears angled just enough to catch sounds from the hallway outside. He had not slept deeply since the night before. Rowan noticed the subtle signs, the way the dog shifted positions, the way his eyes opened at every distant noise. Ash was working, whether he had been asked to or not. By mid-morning, Rowan was walking downtown toward the law office listed in the will. The town was small, the kind of northern place where people nodded at strangers but rarely invited them inside. Storefronts wore old signage and newer paint, trying to look hopeful. As Rowan passed, conversations paused. People looked at him just long enough to register something solid and unfamiliar in his presence, then looked away.
The law office sat above a bakery, the smell of bread lingering in the stairwell. Inside, the air was warm and faintly dusty, lined with shelves of files that had not been moved in years. Behind a wide oak desk sat Eleanor Price, a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair cut into a practical bob and eyes that had learned long ago how to separate emotion from obligation. She stood when Rowan entered, offering a hand that was firm without being aggressive. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Rowan nodded. I didn't know her well. Eleanor studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to offer. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Margaret Hale didn't leave much to interpretation," she said once they were seated, which I suspect was intentional. She slid the will across the desk. Rowan had already read it twice, but he read it again now, slower. The document was brief to the point of austerity. The apartment, the conditions, no mirrors, no renovations, 90 days. Nothing about why. "There's nothing else?" Rowan asked. Eleanor folded her hands. "There is one additional clause." She hesitated, then continued. "No new surveillance equipment is to be installed in the apartment during the 90-day period. That includes cameras, motion sensors, or monitoring systems of any kind." Rowan looked up. "That's specific." "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "Margaret believed some things changed when they were observed too closely." Rowan leaned back in the chair. "And if something feels wrong?" Eleanor's gaze did not waver. She anticipated that question. She paused, then spoke the line exactly as it had been written. "If you encounter something that seems abnormal, do not attempt to resolve it immediately. Allow the interval to pass." Rowan let the words settle. In his world, abnormal conditions were addressed swiftly or not at all. Waiting was not a strategy. It was a gamble. He left the office with more questions than answers, and the distinct sensation that he had been handed a watch instead of a map. The building's management did not wait long to make their presence known. That afternoon, a notice appeared taped to his door, printed on official letterhead. It cited resident concerns and routine inspection, and referenced the apartment's sensitive history without elaboration. No date was given. Only a warning that access would be required. Rowan peeled the paper down and folded it carefully. Ash watched from the hallway, his head tilted slightly, reading the tension in Rowan's shoulders, if not the words themselves. By evening, Rowan noticed the change in the neighbors. Doors that had once remained open now closed a little faster. Conversations in the stairwell ended abruptly when he appeared. A woman on the second floor, thin with dyed blonde hair and nervous hands, hesitated before offering a tight smile and retreating into her unit, as if she had nearly said too much. That night, Ash stationed himself by the door again. Rowan lay awake on the bed, hands folded over his chest, listening to the building settle. The elevator groaned at irregular intervals. Pipes clicked. Somewhere above him, someone walked the length of their apartment, back and forth, like a thought that couldn't rest. Rowan's phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. He reached for it, every sense sharpening. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar address and a single line of text. "You shouldn't live there." No name, no explanation. Rowan stared at the message for a long moment, then locked the phone and set it face down. He had received threats before, warnings, instructions disguised as concern. This felt different. There was no demand attached to it, only a statement.
Ash rose and patted over, placing his head briefly against Rowan's knee, a grounding weight. Rowan rested his hand on the dog's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur, feeling the steady life beneath it. The next morning, Rowan found himself studying the hallway walls, noting the way the light changed at different hours. The apartment no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a position to be held. Midway through the day, the moment came quietly. Rowan was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a cup, when Ash let out a low, controlled sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but something between. Rowan turned in time to see the dog move to the front door and sit, posture alert. Someone was standing on the other side. The knock came a second later, soft but deliberate. Rowan opened the door to find a man in his mid-40s with neatly trimmed facial hair and eyes that assessed before they softened. He wore a dark coat and carried himself with a confidence that suggested he was used to being listened to. His jaw was sharp, his expression composed, but there was something tight around his mouth, as if restraint were a daily habit. "Rowan Hale," the man said. "I'm Caleb Monroe." Ash did not move, but his body shifted subtly, weight balanced forward. Caleb noticed. "You must be Ash," he said, offering a careful smile. "I've heard about you." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" Caleb's smile faded just a fraction. "From people who care about what happens in that apartment." They stood there for a moment, the unspoken weight of the hallway pressing in.
Rowan stepped aside eventually, allowing Caleb entry, though Ash remained between them, seated but watchful. Caleb looked around the apartment, his gaze lingering on the bare walls of the bathroom doorway. Margaret believed in unconventional methods, he said. Avoidance, she called it safety. "And you don't," Rowan replied. "I believe," Caleb said evenly, "that healing requires confrontation." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. After Caleb left, Rowan stood alone in the apartment, Ash still by his side. The visit had confirmed what Rowan had suspected since the night before. This was not a matter of superstition or coincidence. There were people invested in what happened within these walls. That evening, as the light faded and the building grew quiet again, Rowan returned to the kitchen table. He unfolded the inspection notice. He unlocked his phone and reread the anonymous message. For the first time since moving in, Rowan allowed himself to ask the question he had been circling since the will had first crossed his path. Margaret Hale had not been protecting a place. She had been protecting something, or someone, from being forced into view before they were ready. And now, somehow, that responsibility had been passed to him. By the third night, sleep stopped pretending it was available. Rowan lay on his back in the dark, hands folded over his chest, eyes open, watching the ceiling breathe with shadows cast by passing headlights far below. Insomnia did not come to him as panic. It came as erosion, the slow wearing down of certainty. He felt himself thinning, the edges of who he was blurring in a way that unsettled him more than fear ever had. During his years as a SEAL, he had lived entire stretches of life without looking at himself. No mirrors in forward operating bases, no time for reflection beyond mission briefings and after-action reports. Identity had been external then, rank, role, call sign, responsibility. You knew who you were because others depended on it. You moved, acted, reacted. You didn't ask questions that didn't help you survive. Now, in a civilian apartment with white walls and too much quiet, Rowan realized something disturbing. Without a mirror, without a reflection, He did not feel less vain. He felt less real. Ash sensed the change before Rowan admitted it to himself. The German Shepherd followed him more closely now, large body moving with controlled grace through the narrow apartment, nails clicking softly against the floor. Ash was 6 or 7, his black and tan coat worn smooth by years of work rather than show, his amber eyes always measuring, always present. When Rowan paced at night, Ash paced with him. When Rowan stopped, Ash sat. The dog's breathing remained steady, a counterpoint to Rowan's restless thoughts. The questions started arriving during the day. The first was a woman on the stairs, a neighbor Rowan had seen only in passing. She was middle-aged, with a tired face and a posture that suggested she apologized often without speaking. As Rowan passed, she hesitated, fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "Do you have a mirror in there?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan paused. "No." Her shoulders sagged, relief or disappointment, he couldn't tell which, and she nodded too quickly. "That's probably for the best," she murmured before hurrying away. The second came from the building's maintenance supervisor, a broad-shouldered man with thinning hair and a habit of avoiding eye contact. He lingered longer than necessary during a routine hallway check, clearing his throat. "Strange question," the man said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You ever think about putting one of those mirrors back up?" "Back up?" Rowan asked. The man flushed. "I mean, if you wanted to. Some people say it helps. Facing things." Rowan watched him carefully. "Facing what?" The supervisor shrugged, already retreating. "Just things." The third came from Caleb Monroe. Caleb arrived unannounced late that afternoon, his presence announced first by Ash's sudden tension. The dog moved to the front door before there was any knock, sitting with his spine straight and ears forward.
Rowan opened the door to find Caleb standing there with the same controlled composure as before. Dark coat buttoned neatly, trimmed beard outlining a sharp jaw. Caleb was a man who believed in systems. It showed in the way he stood, feet planted evenly, hands relaxed but ready, eyes constantly assessing. He looked like someone who had learned early in life that being reasonable often meant being firm. "You've been asked the question," Caleb said, stepping inside once Rowan allowed it. It was not phrased as an accusation. It was a statement. "About mirrors?" Rowan replied. Caleb nodded. 3 times, if I'm guessing right. Ash shifted closer to Rowan, his body angled slightly toward Caleb, a subtle barrier. Caleb noticed, his gaze flicking down to the dog before returning to Rowan's face.
"You know," Caleb said calmly, "Margaret believed avoidance was protection." "And you don't," Rowan said. "I believe avoidance is delay," Caleb replied. "Sometimes a dangerous one." They moved into the living area, the air between them heavy with things neither was saying outright. Caleb glanced toward the bedroom hallway, then back at Rowan. "There was a young woman," Caleb continued. "Margaret took her in, helped her recover, or tried to." Rowan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You think she failed?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I think she interfered too long, shielded too much. At some point, healing requires confrontation. You don't recover by pretending the enemy isn't there." Ash let out a low sound then, barely audible. Not aggression, disapproval.
Caleb stopped speaking mid-sentence, his attention snapping fully to the dog. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "That dog," Caleb said slowly. "He was trained for this kind of environment, wasn't he?" Rowan said nothing. Caleb nodded to himself. "I thought so." After Caleb left, the apartment felt smaller. Rowan stood in the center of the living room, the echo of Caleb's words bouncing around inside his skull. Confrontation, avoidance, delay. They were all words he understood intimately, words that had governed life and death decisions. That night, Ash began pulling him toward the bedroom wall. It was subtle at first, A pause near the corner, a glance back at Rowan, then again and again.
Each time, the same spot, a section of wall where the paint bubbled faintly, the surface uneven as if it had been disturbed long ago. Rowan finally gave in and followed. Ash stood with his nose inches from the wall, breathing slowly. His tail was still. His posture was not fearful. It was attentive, like a soldier waiting for a signal. Rowan raised his knuckles and tapped. The sound was wrong, hollow. He tapped again, slower, listening. The hollow space extended farther than expected, as if a cavity had been sealed deliberately behind the drywall. Rowan reached for a tool from his kit, the familiar comfort of preparedness steadying his hands. As he pressed the tip against the wall, he hesitated. That was when he heard it, a whisper, so faint it might have been imagined, so soft it barely disturbed the air. It was not a word. It was a plea, stripped of language, a sound shaped by fear and restraint. Don't. Rowan froze. Ash stepped back slightly, eyes locked on the wall, ears high. The whisper did not come again. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Rowan lowered the tool. He did not open the wall. Later, sitting at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed, Rowan replayed the moment again and again. He did not believe in ghosts. He did believe in memory, in the way trauma embedded itself into spaces, into routines, into bodies. He thought of the shard of glass still tucked in his jacket pocket. Caleb's words returned uninvited. Healing requires confrontation. Rowan looked down at his hands, scarred and steady. He thought of every time he had been ordered to move forward without hesitation, to breach, to clear, to engage. He thought of the cost of that certainty. Ash rested his head on Rowan's knee, the weight grounding him. Rowan finally understood the shape of the conflict unfolding around him. This was not about whether mirrors were good or bad. It was about who got to decide when someone was ready to be seen. And as the night deepened, Rowan faced the question he could no longer avoid. If confronting was healing, then what, exactly, was restraint? Rowan met her again on a Tuesday evening when the building was caught between daylight and night, that uneasy hour when shadows lengthened but had not yet decided what they would become. He had just returned from walking Ash along the river path behind the apartments, the air sharp with pine and cold water, when he heard footsteps in the hallway, quick, uneven, as if the person making them did not want to be noticed. Ash stopped first. The German shepherd's head lifted, ears angling forward, body going still in a way Rowan had learned to trust. Not alarm, not aggression, attention. Rowan turned just as the girl came into view at the far end of the corridor. She was young, late 20s maybe, but carried herself with a guarded stiffness that made her seem older, slim, almost fragile in build, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie that hung from her shoulders as if it belonged to someone else. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low, careless knot, strands slipping free around her face. Her skin was pale, not sickly, but marked by the kind of exhaustion that came from long battles fought in silence. When she saw Rowan, she froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she looked past him, past Ash, past the doorway, her eyes darting toward the bathroom hall, as if it were a place she could feel without seeing. "You live here," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, steady only because she was forcing it to be. "Yes," Rowan replied. She swallowed. I wasn't sure if anyone had moved in yet." Ash took one step forward, then stopped. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply watched her, his gaze intent, measuring. The girl noticed. Her hands tightened inside the sleeves of her hoodie, but she did not step back. "You can come in," Rowan said after a beat. She hesitated, then nodded once, as if committing herself to something she had already decided but still feared. When she crossed the threshold, Ash shifted again, positioning himself between her and the hallway that led to the bathroom, not blocking her path, guarding it. My name is Mara, she said softly. Mara Quinn. Rowan closed the door behind her. The click of the lock echoed too loudly in the small space. Mara flinched at the sound, then exhaled slowly, grounding herself. She stood just inside the living area, eyes lowered, taking in the room without fully looking at it. Rowan noticed what she avoided. The angle of her body kept her line of sight away from reflective surfaces, even accidental ones. The dark screen of the television, the polished metal of the kitchen sink. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she were navigating a minefield only she could see. This place, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper, saved my life. Rowan did not interrupt. It also nearly ended it, she added, after a pause that stretched long enough to carry weight. Ash sat down without being told, his posture calm but alert. He watched Mara the way he watched unstable terrain, not as a threat, but as something that required vigilance. When she shifted, his ears tracked the movement. When her breathing quickened, his body leaned subtly forward. You don't like the bathroom, Rowan said quietly. Mara's head snapped up, surprise flashing across her face. Then she looked away again, toward the window, anywhere but the hallway. I don't go near it, she said. Not when there's nothing there. Nothing? Rowan asked. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but held no humor. Exactly. Mara moved to the couch and sat, curling slightly inward, as if making herself smaller might keep her safe. Rowan remained standing, giving her space. Ash repositioned himself, not too close, not too far, close enough to intervene, far enough not to overwhelm. The mirror, Mara said at last. It was always the mirror. Rowan felt something settle into place. Not clarity, but alignment. When I was here before, she continued, I couldn't stop looking, even when I didn't want to, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. I thought if I stared long enough, I'd see something change, something improve. Instead, all I saw were reasons to punish myself for not being better. Ash made a small sound, almost a sigh. I started skipping meals, Mara said. Then days, then weeks. She glanced briefly toward Ash, then back down. Margaret took the mirror down. Everyone else said she was enabling me, that she was letting me hide. Rowan thought of Caleb, of confrontation, of delay. She wasn't hiding me, Mara said firmly, as if answering the argument in advance. She was buying me time. Ash rose suddenly and moved closer, sitting at Mara's feet. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed when he did nothing more than exist there, solid and warm. He doesn't hate me, Mara observed quietly. No, Rowan said. He doesn't. He watches me, she said. Rowan nodded. That's different. Mara's lips curved into the faintest smile. That feels accurate. She looked up at Rowan then, really looked at him for the first time. Her gaze lingered on his posture, the way he held himself, as if braced against invisible weight, on the faint scars along his hands, on the steadiness that suggested he was someone who had learned to be calm because chaos had once demanded it. You're not here by accident, she said. I don't think so, Rowan replied. Mara inhaled deeply, as if drawing courage from the air itself. I need to come back, she said. Not forever, just once more. For what? Rowan asked. There's paperwork, she said. Medical records, final signatures. Things that prove I'm not running. Her jaw tightened. The 90 days matter. If they change the apartment before then, if someone puts the mirror back, I won't be able to do it. Rowan felt the weight of the word won't, not refusal, inability. What happens if you're forced to? He asked gently. Mara's eyes flicked to the hallway again, to the place where the mirror should have been. "Then I won't survive it," she said simply. Ash shifted closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against her knee. The contact startled her, but she did not pull away. Her breathing slowed. Rowan understood then what Ash had known from the moment Mara stepped inside. The dog was not protecting Rowan. He was protecting the fragile balance that allowed Mara to remain intact. "I'll keep it as it is," Rowan said, "for the 90 days. Mara closed her eyes, relief washing over her face in the way that made her look suddenly younger, almost like the person she might have been before the mirror taught her to be cruel to herself. "Thank you," she whispered. When she stood to leave, she paused at the doorway and looked back at Rowan, not at the apartment. "Some things," she said softly, "aren't meant to be seen until we're gentle enough not to destroy them." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Rowan locked the door and leaned against it, Ash sitting at his side. The apartment felt different now, not safer, not calmer, but purposeful. He was no longer just living here, he was standing watch. Rowan knew something was wrong the moment he stepped into the building. It wasn't the sound, though the old elevator did groan longer than usual, its cables whining as if burdened by more than weight. It wasn't the smell either, though the hallway carried a sharp, unfamiliar tang, like metal disturbed after years of stillness. It was Ash. The German Shepherd halted at the threshold of the corridor, body going rigid, muscles locking beneath his thick black and tan coat. His ears angled forward, tail lowered but steady, every line of him communicating a single, unmistakable message. Stop. Rowan followed Ash's gaze down the long hallway toward his apartment. At the far end, standing where empty air should have been, something caught the light and fractured it. A mirror. It was tall, nearly as high as the wall itself, leaning upright against the hallway just outside Rowan's door. The glass was clean, too clean, its surface flawless and unforgiving, reflecting the dim corridor back at itself with cruel precision. It did not belong. It had not been there that morning. Rowan was certain of it, in the same way he had been certain about the mark on the bathroom wall and the shard of glass in his pocket. Ash moved first. He stepped forward and positioned himself directly in front of the mirror, standing squarely between it and Rowan's apartment. His stance was deliberate, legs braced, chest out, head high. He did not growl, he did not bark. He simply refused to move. Rowan's heart rate quickened, not with fear, but with recognition. This was not confusion. This was a boundary. He took out his phone and called building management. The response came quickly, too quickly. Within minutes, the hallway filled with voices and footsteps. The maintenance supervisor arrived first, flanked by a younger assistant who avoided looking directly at the mirror. The supervisor's expression was strained, his smile brittle. "Must be a technical error," he said, gesturing vaguely at the glass. "Inventory mix-up. Someone probably staged it in the wrong spot." Rowan looked at him. "Staged it how?" The man cleared his throat. "Renovation supplies. Happens." Rowan's gaze didn't leave the mirror. "For an apartment under a no-renovation clause?" The supervisor shifted his weight, discomfort seeping through his practiced calm. "We didn't think." "Don't," Rowan said quietly. The word landed heavier than he intended. Caleb Monroe arrived next. He walked down the hallway with measured confidence, his dark coat unbuttoned, his trimmed beard catching the light. Unlike the others, he looked directly at the mirror, then at Rowan, then at Ash. His eyes lingered on the dog for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "This doesn't have to be dramatic," Caleb said evenly. "It's a necessary step." "A necessary step for whom?" Rowan asked. Caleb's jaw tightened, just enough to show restraint. "For Mara." Ash shifted, nails scraping softly against the floor as he adjusted his stance. His body remained fixed in front of the mirror. "You're forcing her," Rowan said. Caleb shook his head. "I'm helping her finish what Margaret started. Healing doesn't come from hiding. You know that." Rowan did know that. He also knew the cost of forcing readiness. "The will forbids changes," Rowan said. Caleb spread his hands. "This isn't a change. It's a correction." The word hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Rowan felt the pressure closing in from both sides, the legal language of the will, the moral certainty in Caleb's voice, the quiet authority of Ash's refusal. He had stood in worse places with fewer options, but this battlefield felt different. There were no uniforms here, no clear enemy, just people convinced they were right. Ash growled then, low and controlled, the sound vibrating through his chest like a warning shot fired into the ground. Caleb took an involuntary step back. Rowan raised a hand, signaling Ash to hold. The dog obeyed, but did not retreat. Rowan looked at the mirror again. For a fleeting moment, he caught his own reflection in it. Broad shoulders, rigid posture, eyes harder than he remembered. The sight struck him with unexpected force, not because he hadn't seen himself in days, but because the reflection felt like an accusation. Ash lunged. The movement was sudden, explosive, all controlled power released in a single decisive action. His shoulder struck the mirror's edge, his weight driving forward with purpose. The glass shattered in a violent, cascading crash, shards exploding outward across the hallway floor. Silence followed. The maintenance assistant gasped. The supervisor swore under his breath. Caleb stared, stunned. Ash stood amid the wreckage, uninjured, breathing steady. Shards of glass lay scattered around his paws like fallen ice. Rowan stepped forward, heart pounding, not from the destruction, but from what it revealed. On the back of the mirror, etched faintly into the wood frame, were words so light they might have been missed if the glass hadn't broken. "Don't let them see themselves yet." Rowan felt something cold settle in his chest. This had never been an accident. This had been planned. Someone had wanted the mirror placed here, visible, unavoidable. Someone had wanted to force the moment of confrontation. Caleb read the words and went very still. "That's not," he began, then stopped. Rowan turned to him. "You believe you're saving her?" Caleb's eyes flashed. "I am." "And if you're wrong?" Rowan asked. Caleb did not answer. The maintenance supervisor backed away, already reaching for his phone, muttering about reports and liability. The hallway emptied quickly after that, people retreating from a conflict they suddenly wanted no part of. When only Rowan, Caleb, and Ash remained, the space felt cavernous. "This isn't over," Caleb said quietly. "I know," Rowan replied. Caleb hesitated, then nodded once and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Rowan knelt beside Ash, checking him carefully. The dog leaned into his touch, calm and present, eyes steady. "Good call," Rowan murmured. Ash's tail thumped once against the floor. As Rowan swept up the shards later that night, he understood the truth he had been resisting. This was not a fight about mirrors. It was a fight about who got to decide when someone was ready to face themselves. And Rowan made his choice. No one would be forced. Not on his watch. Rowan did not open the wall immediately. For 2 days after the mirror shattered, he left the bedroom untouched, the faint outline of the hollow space behind the drywall existing in his awareness like a held breath. He slept little, ate when necessary, moved through the apartment with the quiet precision of someone waiting for a moment to declare itself. Ash stayed close, closer than usual, his large body often pressed against Rowan's leg or stationed just outside the bedroom door, as if guarding a threshold that was no longer purely physical. On the 3rd night, Rowan decided the waiting had become its own form of avoidance. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that came not from peace but from suspension. Rowan knelt by the wall Ash had marked, fingers tracing the uneven paint. Up close, the surface bore faint scars, hairline cracks, small indentations where something had once been fastened and removed. Someone had been careful. Someone had not wanted this space to be obvious. Ash sat behind him, watching. Rowan worked slowly, methodically, using a small pry tool rather than brute force. The drywall gave with a muted snap, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled faintly of paper and dust and time. He widened the opening just enough to reach inside. What he pulled out first was a folder, then another, then a stack of notebooks bound with string, the paper yellowed at the edges. Rowan set them on the floor and sat back on his heels, heart beating harder than he expected. Ash stepped forward and sniffed the air near the opening, then relaxed slightly, as if reassured by what he sensed. There was no threat here, only history. The folders were clinical, intake forms, progress notes, evaluation summaries. Rowan did not need to read every word to understand their nature. They documented a long, uneven recovery, periods of improvement followed by setbacks, language careful and precise, never cruel, but never fully gentle either. Names appeared again and again, some crossed out, others annotated in Margaret Hale's steady handwriting. The notebooks were different. Margaret's journals were not neat. They were not written for an audience. The handwriting slanted slightly, lines sometimes drifting downward, as if the words themselves were tired. Rowan opened the first and read, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing." The honesty struck him harder than any confession could have. Margaret wrote about Mara in fragments, never sensational, never indulgent. She wrote about fear, Mara's fear of reflection, her own fear of intervening too much. She acknowledged the accusations leveled against her by professionals and family alike. "You're sheltering her, you're delaying the inevitable, you're making it worse." "Maybe I am," Margaret wrote, "but I have watched what happens when people are pushed to be strong before they have learned to be safe." Rowan felt the words land somewhere deep in his chest. Margaret admitted her doubts freely. She did not paint herself as a savior. She described moments when she questioned whether removing the mirror was a kindness or a crutch, whether she had confused protection with control. But she returned again and again to the same conclusion. There is a difference between refusing to see and being forced to look. The 90 days appeared again and again in the margins. Margaret wrote of them as a buffer, a final boundary she could create once she knew her time was ending. Not a cure, not a solution, a pause, a chance for choice. Rowan closed the journal and sat in silence. Ash moved closer and lay down beside him, his large head resting against Rowan's thigh. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, grounding in its simplicity. Rowan rested a hand on Ash's neck, fingers pressing into the familiar muscle. He thought of the way Ash had reacted to the mirror. Not with fear, not with rage, but with certainty. One of the folders caught Rowan's attention then. It was thinner than the rest, its label handwritten in a different ink. He opened it and felt something shift into place. Training records. Ash's. Rowan scanned the pages, understanding dawning. Ash had not always been Rowan's dog. He had been trained as a therapy and support animal, conditioned to recognize signs of acute distress, dissociation, relapse. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, obsessive fixation. The records detailed scenarios Ash had been exposed to, the behaviors he had learned to interrupt gently, or, when necessary, decisively. Ash had not been reacting to superstition. He had been responding to risk. Rowan let out a long breath, something in him easing even as the implications grew heavier. Ash's vigilance around Mara, his refusal to let Rowan enter the bathroom, his destruction of the mirror. All of it made sense now, framed not by instinct alone, but by training layered onto instinct, purpose given form. Rowan leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. He thought of his own records, files locked away in military archives, redacted and summarized and stripped of context. Evaluations that spoke of resilience and operational effectiveness, of leadership under fire. None of them mentioned the nights he woke up convinced he had failed someone he could not name. None of them recorded the cost of being told, again and again, to push through, to adapt, to overcome. Strength had been demanded of him long before he knew how to ask for help. He saw the parallel clearly now. Mara had been told to confront her reflection before she had learned how to survive what she saw. Rowan had been told to shoulder responsibility before he had learned how to set it down. Both had been praised for endurance. Neither had been offered gentleness as an option. The apartment did not heal them. It removed one weapon. Rowan gathered the journals and folders carefully and placed them back into the cavity, then sealed the opening with the same care Margaret must have used years earlier. The wall returned to its unassuming state, the secret hidden once more, not out of denial, but respect. That night, Rowan slept more deeply than he had since moving in. The next day, Caleb Monroe returned. He stood in the doorway with his familiar composed posture, his frustration carefully leashed. His gaze flicked briefly to the wall, then to Ash, then back to Rowan. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Caleb said. Rowan met his eyes steadily. "I'm making it safer." Caleb exhaled sharply. "You're delaying her progress." Rowan shook his head. "I'm preserving her agency." They stood there, two men shaped by conviction, neither willing to step aside. Rowan understood then that Caleb truly believed he was right. That belief made him dangerous, not malicious, but inflexible. "No mirrors," Rowan said quietly. "Not before the 90 days are over." Caleb searched Rowan's face, looking for hesitation, for doubt. He found none. "This isn't what Margaret wanted," Caleb said. Rowan thought of the journals, of the trembling honesty in Margaret's words. "It's exactly what she wanted," Rowan replied. After Caleb left, Rowan sat at the kitchen table and marked the remaining days on the small calendar he had taped to the fridge. Each crossed-out square felt less like a countdown and more like a vow. Ash lay at his feet, finally relaxed, his body loose in a way it had not been since the mirror incident. Rowan understood his role fully now. He was not a healer, he was a guard. And until the 90 days were over, no one, no matter how convinced they were of their righteousness, would force a reckoning that someone else was not ready to face. The 90th day arrived without ceremony, carried in on the long, gentle light of a northern summer morning. Rowan woke early, not from tension this time, but from habit. Sunlight stretched across the wooden floor in clean bands, warming the room without asking permission. Outside, the town moved slowly, unburdened by urgency. The river behind the building caught the light and returned it in soft flashes, as if reminding the world that reflection could exist without judgment. Ash lay at the foot of the bed, fully relaxed for the first time since Rowan had moved in. His body was loose, paws extended, tail still. When Rowan swung his legs over the side of the mattress, the dog opened one eye, assessed the moment, and closed it again. No vigilance, no watchfulness, just trust. Rowan brewed coffee and stood by the window while it cooled, hands wrapped around the mug, breathing in steam and quiet. He did not mark the day on the calendar. He didn't need to. Every part of him knew what this day was. The knock came mid-morning. Ash rose immediately, but without urgency. He walked to the door and sat, posture alert but calm, as if greeting something expected rather than feared. Rowan opened the door to find Mara standing in the hallway. She looked different, not transformed, not miraculously healed, but steadier. Her posture was straighter, her shoulders no longer drawn inward as if bracing for impact. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a light jacket over a pale shirt, but they fit her, not like armor, not like concealment. Her hair was down, dark waves framing her face. There were still shadows under her eyes, still traces of old battles in the lines around her mouth, but her gaze met Rowan's without flinching. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Rowan replied, stepping aside. Mara crossed the threshold with deliberate ease. She paused just inside, breathing once, deeply, then let the air out slowly. Ash approached and stopped a step away from her, head tilted, eyes soft. She smiled faintly and reached down, fingers brushing the thick fur along his neck. He accepted the touch without leaning into it, calm and present. Caleb Monroe stood a few feet back in the hallway, hands in his coat pockets. He had arrived quietly, unnoticed until now. His expression was unreadable, composed, restrained, as if he had prepared himself for whatever outcome this day delivered. The apartment felt different with all three of them inside it. Less tense, less sharp, like a place that had finished holding its breath. Mara set her bag down on the kitchen table and glanced briefly toward the bathroom hallway. She did not avert her eyes in panic this time. She simply acknowledged it, the way one acknowledges a scar, present, real, no longer in control. Rowan waited. He had rehearsed no speeches, prepared no arguments. He knew better now than to fill silence that belonged to someone else. "Mara," he said finally, his voice low and steady, "do you want to look?" The question hung between them, simple and unadorned. No pressure, no expectation. Mara considered it. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in fear, but in thought. When she opened them again, she shook her head once. "No," she said. The word landed gently, without apology. "And that's okay," Rowan said. Mara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her shoulders eased, the tension draining from them like water receding from shore. Caleb watched the exchange in silence. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. He said nothing. For the first time since Rowan had met him, Caleb did not argue, did not reframe, did not insist. He simply bore witness. Mara retrieved a folder from her bag and laid it on the table. Papers, signatures, final confirmations. She completed the last of what she had come to do with careful attention, her hand steady as she signed her name. That afternoon, Rowan retrieved a small package from the closet, a mirror no larger than a book, its frame simple, unadorned. He held it in his hands for a long moment before deciding where to place it. He chose the hallway, angled not to catch faces, only light. When he hung it, the mirror reflected the window opposite, sunlight spilling across wood and wall, shifting gently as the day moved on. No bodies, no scrutiny, just brightness. Rowan stood before it for a moment. He did not straighten his posture, did not square his shoulders, did not summon the version of himself that wore uniforms and carried responsibility like armor. He simply stood. And for the first time in a long while, he looked without needing to be anything. Ash lay down at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The dog was done working, completely, unmistakably done. The apartment was quiet. Not the tense quiet of vigilance, but the lived-in quiet of a place at rest. Rowan understood then what the space had been all along. Not a cure, not a test. A pause. A place where no one was forced to become someone they were not ready to be. And sometimes, Rowan realized, seeing yourself mattered. Just not before you were ready. Sometimes the miracle is not that God removes the mirror. Sometimes the miracle is that He stands beside us and waits until we are ready to look. In a world that constantly tells us to be stronger, faster, better, God often works in quieter ways. He gives us pauses instead of pushes. He gives us companions instead of commands. He places people, and sometimes even animals, in our lives to guard our hearts when we are too tired to guard them ourselves. If this story touched something in you, maybe it's because you are carrying a place in your life that needs patience, not pressure. Maybe you are healing in ways that don't look impressive to the world, but are deeply meaningful to heaven. Take your time. God is not in a hurry with you. If you believe someone you love needs to hear this message today, please share this video with them. Leave a comment and tell us what part of the story stayed with you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Silent Paws, Steady Hearts so we can continue sharing stories of quiet strength, faithful companionship, and hope that walks beside us. May God bless you, protect your heart, and grant you the gentleness you deserve on your journey.